Morning, everyone. Can you guys hear me? Can you guys hear me? Can somebody just let me know?
Yes.
Thank you. If you guys don't want to turn on your mic, then you can use your chat. You can just send a text for any question or any comment or any answer for that matter. Okay. So far, we have covered the reading from the previous week, week 9. And there's a quiz online, which you do have available. The quiz deals with that particular reading. And I'm going to be adding more as the semester progresses. Okay. Does anyone have any questions at the moment regarding the online quiz or last week's reading? Okay.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Good morning. Okay, guys. So last week we dealt with the nature of beliefs in general. And I think the main point was I'm trying to say is the world around us, in a sense, to an extent, does not make sense. Many things that we see don't make sense. And in order for us as a species to make things a bit more comfortable, a bit more meaningful, we invent reasons for believing in things. We make belief of things. And so beliefs give us a sense of comfort. Okay. So we did not really talk about knowing, we talked about forming beliefs. And we said the distinction between having a belief and, having knowledge of something is that knowledge requires some sort of evidence, and belief requires simply a matter of faith, right? A trust. A trust.
Kind of a system.
Sorry? Somebody said something? Okay, I guess that was just an accident of a something. So beliefs require a faith in nature, a faith in a person, a faith in an institution, a faith in yourself, in order to form opinions really that don't have much basis. Your belief that there's a heaven or hell after life, your belief that there's reincarnation, your belief that there's a new life after, your belief in miracles, your belief that things happen for a reason. They don't just happen arbitrary. A lot of these things we invent not to make sense of the world necessarily, but also to make things more comfortable for us. Okay? And one thing also we saw is that despite the comfort that beliefs give us, they also generate in the long run a kind of a discomfort, a kind of anxiety, especially when we start questioning those beliefs or when we find reasons for tossing them aside. You suddenly realize that what you believed about a particular person or what you believe about a particular aspect of life is not true. And aside from the disappointment that it creates of discovering that this is false, right, there's a lot of tension and anxiety about losing that kind of belief because you're losing faith. Today, we're going to look at two different schools of thought One is called rationalism, and one is called empiricism. Okay, so rationalism versus empiricism. Okay, rationalism begins with the idea that knowledge, true knowledge, is not something that depends on sensations. Okay? And empiricism, on the other hand, rests on the opposite idea, that we can only form knowledge, based on the sensations that we have. Right? If we don't have sensations, then we cannot form knowledge. Think of a child born blind from birth. That child can never understand the concept of color. That child understands the concept of sound, the concept of space, time, but when it comes to explaining anything about color or shade or hue, right, or tone, when it comes to colors, of course, this person cannot form any genuine or real comprehension of that thing. Okay? So two opposite schools of thought. One believes that knowledge depends on reason, not senses. And why does someone like that believe in this kind of idea? Think of Plato now, and we're looking at Plato's concept of rationalism, okay? Plato says knowledge, true knowledge, is something that's fixed. It doesn't change over time. It doesn't change from person to person. It doesn't change from culture to culture. To give you an example of this, 2 plus 2 equals 4. That's an objective statement. You don't see the 2, you don't see the plus sign, you don't see the equal sign, but you understand the relationships between these numbers. And you're able to understand that 2 plus 2 equals 4, not see that 2 plus 2 equals 4. Okay? And when you think about it, 2 plus 2 equals 4 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 1,000 years from now. 2 plus 2 equals 4 in Jamaica, in Asia, in Europe, in Africa, in India. It doesn't matter. It's 2 plus 2 equals 4 for the Christian, for the Buddhist, for the Hindu, right? Anywhere. Of course, unless you're a banker, 2 plus 2 equals, depending on did I lend money or did I borrow money? Now, that's a joke, of course. Okay? But you would want knowledge to be something that's fixed in that way. Plato also says the senses never really give you answers that are fixed and permanent and not changing. Ask yourself, is this finger long or short? Well, if you compare it to this finger, it's short. If you compare it to this finger, it's long. So this finger is neither short nor long, or is it short or is it long? Your senses can deceive you, tell you it's short or tell you it's long, depending on what are you comparing it with. However, okay, there's a particular measurement for this finger. And that measurement is not something that you can see, it's something that you can understand. Okay? To give you another example, think of a cup of coffee. If you're working outside and it's minus 30 outside and you come in and I give you a warm cup of coffee, you might say, right? You might say, wow, what a hot cup of coffee, because you're coming in from the cold. If you're working in a bakery and I give you the cup of coffee, you might tell yourself, wow, what what a cool cup of coffee. Can you make it hotter? So if you're coming from a very cold environment, the cup of coffee seems hot to you. If you're coming from a very hot environment, the cup of coffee seems cool for you. However, there's a real temperature for the cup of coffee. And the real temperature is not something you feel with your hand, depending on the context. It's something that you can measure scientifically. So Plato, in the first reading that we were covering, okay, Plato wants to send us a message or the idea that truth is not something that you can sense. Okay, so this is the cave allegory in a republic. Okay, I'm not going to go through the reading. I will explain to you the reading and why we have prisoners in there, just to make it more understandable. Okay, and then we will move on to the other reading, which is empiricism. So Plato, okay, is a rationalist, and he wants to describe for us how we come to know things. And he uses an allegory or an analogy or story to get the point across. Plato wrote in a very unique way, even though it's 2,500 years ago. He wrote a theatrical piece. He wrote a dialogue like a theater, like a drama between two people. And that drama includes, of course, the dialogue, but then it includes the lesson that he wants to teach us. So it's almost like a good dramatical work that has values. It's not just empty, shoot them, kill them, chase them, run them to the ground, cowboy kind of movie. It's almost like a movie with a lesson every time, a meaning, something deep. And he describes people to be living in a cave, facing forward, never able to get up, never able to turn right, never able to turn left. The people are chained and forced to look only forward. Okay? The chains symbolize for us, in the case of Plato, our norms, our cultures, our values, right? Things that we believe in depending on where we grew up. Russell last week said a person that has no value for philosophy lives their life like a prisoner of their time, a prisoner of their prejudice, a prisoner of their culture and beliefs, and so on. And so that really understanding of how culture, norms, beliefs, biases, prejudices imprison us, that actually comes from Plato. Okay, so Plato is describing society as people sitting down in a cave, looking forward at the wall in front of them, chained at the hands, the feet, the neck, so that you cannot get up, you cannot walk away, you cannot turn right, and you cannot turn left. And as we're looking forward, we see in front of us, okay, almost like a screen. We see a projection on the wall in front of us in the form of a shade. So behind us, where we're sitting, there's a fire that produces light. Without the fire, without the light, we're not able to see anything. And that light in front of it, it has some shapes, the shape of a horse, the shape of a cat, the shape of a dog, and they're almost like a cardboard cutout of the dog, the cat, the car, and so on. And they're passing in front of us, creating a shadow on the wall. Very much like when you have a light facing a wall and you put your hands together and you try to make a butterfly or a bird or something like that. So all we have in front of us at the bottom level is the shadows of the dog, the cat, the car, and so on. And so the child or a person asks his mother or parent or someone next to him and says, "What is that on the wall?" And the mother answers, says, "That's a cat." Then they put another shadow on the wall. And the kid asks the mother, "What is that on the wall?" And she says, "That's a car," and so on. So here at the very bottom level, we're dealing with shadows, illusions, and we're dealing with hearsay, people telling us things. And that's the very first initial way of learning things. Okay? When, I have a 20-year-old son, when he was like 2 or 3 years old, I would come home and his mom would say to me, "Look what your son can do." I say, "What?" And then she says to him, 2 + 2. And he will say 4. 2 + 3, 5. 4 + 4, 8. Okay? He could answer these questions even though he has no understanding of what they mean. Like a parrot, he just mimicked what mom told him. He memorized it and he basically said it. That's how we are at the bottom level of the cave analogy. We see shadows of things, not things, not the real objects. We see shadows of them. And people tell us what these shadows mean, and we take it for granted without questioning things. Okay. Now, at the bottom of the cave, somebody manages to break free. Somebody, somehow, manages to break their chains, to overcome their prejudice, to question what they've been told. And as the person breaks his chains, starts climbing up, and suddenly he notices the fire. And he notices the cardboard cutout of the horse and the cat and the car. And he says to himself, "Hold on a second. That shadow on the wall is a copy of this cardboard. It's just an illusion of the cardboard. The real horse is what I'm holding in my hand, this cardboard. The real cat is what I'm holding in my hand, this cardboard. The real dog and so on is what I'm holding in my hand, which is the cardboard." So at the very bottom stage, we believe what we're told. We look at shadows of things and we take it without question, believing that that's the truth. At the second level, we don't accept shadows anymore, and we don't accept hearsay, right? What just people tell us, but rather we break our chain of submission. We question what we're told. We question it to the point that we don't believe in the truth that this shadow is real in any sense, or it's telling me something real in any sense. But now we rely on the objects themselves to think that that's what they are, that the object you see in front of you, the cardboard, is really the horse, the cat, the dog, and so on. Okay. When my son was 4, my son who would say 2 + 2 = 4, 2 + 3 = 5, and so on, even though he didn't understand it, one day I came home from work and my son was waiting for me. And I'll never forget this moment, right? He was very excited. He wants to show me something. So he takes me to the table and he says to me, "Dad, look." And on the table, he has 2 red Skittles, the candy, the Skittle, 2 balls of Skittles. And next to them, he has 2 orange Skittles, 2 red Skittles and 2 orange Skittles. And he says to me, "Dad, look, 2 + 2 = 4. And he's got this shock on his face. He's totally shocked. It's as if for the very first time in his life, his short 4-year-old life, 5-year-old, whatever it was, he understood what his mom was telling him for years. 2 plus 2 equals 4. He really understood that when you get two objects and you add it to do similar objects, you can say 4. He did not think now 2 Skittles plus 2 grains of salt equals 4, or 2 Skittles plus 2 human beings equals 4. He's instinctively and naturally adding similar things to each other. But being present in front of these objects allowed him to understand what he knew blindly before. 2 plus 2 equals 4. He memorized it. He knew it. He didn't quite understand it. He was dealing with shadows and objects at the very bottom of a cave. But now he thinks he understands what 2 plus 2 equals 4 because he managed to get 2 objects plus 2 objects, and now that means 4. He's dealing with the objects themselves. Similarly, right, the person on the second level of the cave is no longer dealing with the shadows of objects or what people are telling him, but rather he's dealing with actual cardboard cutouts. Okay? He goes down to his friends who are chained and he tries to break their chains, but he can't. So he decides to tell them, guys, what you see in front of you is a shadow, is not a real object. And they respond and tell him, you must be crazy. We have been seeing these shadows for 1,000 years. Our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents told us what they mean. These shadows are real. Forget about breaking the chain. Come back where you belong. They don't believe him. Right? They don't want to accept the truth. Right? This person is crazy. So what does he do? He says, well, I cannot stay at the bottom with these people. Right? They hate me. They don't like what I'm saying. And I can see that if I keep climbing up that cave, there is something. So let me climb up. Let me go along with my inquiry. Let me keep asking questions. Since the shadow I was seeing at the bottom is not real, but the shadow is a copy of this object, let me see if there is something else. Maybe the object I'm looking at is a copy of something else. Maybe, right? So he starts questioning himself, breaking his chain, or climbing to another level in the cave. So he moved from the very bottom level, where you rely simply on hearsay and shadows, to the second level. And in the second level, he realized that there are physical objects which I can really rely on to form my beliefs. And he starts thinking that these cardboards, these physical objects, are the source of truth. Sensation is the source of truth. Just like that 5-year-old boy who discovered 2 Skittles plus 2 Skittles, when you add them together, that equals 4. So you think that the truth of mathematics depends on these objects. You climb up some more, and as you climb up the ladder or the staircase or whatever, you get to the door of the cave and you open it up. And what's the first thing you see when you get out of the cave? Anybody?
Light,
Absolutely. Not just light. You see,
like so much, so many like of course when you are cave and go when you leave the when you go out you see so many things like the whole sceneries. I mean not sorry the lake, trees, whatever in front of you like it's open. Because when it's cave it's so dark, but when you go out it's of course it's a
In
light and
fact,
everything. Like
you're almost right. In fact, the first thing that you see is very, very bright light so that you can't see the objects.
exactly.
Right? What you see is a blinding light, very uncomforting light, right? It's blinding, it's in your face, it's leaving a bad taste in your eyes, it's leaving you blinded, unable to know where you are, unable to turn right, to turn left, to stand up. It's really disturbing kind of a light. And just like at the bottom of the cave, the fire was enabling us to see things. Now, when he got out of the cave, there is the sun, the light from the sun. And the light from the sun, slowly, as he gets used to it, enables him to see the dog, the cat, the car, the tree, and so forth. And at that moment, he starts thinking to himself, hold on a second. That cardboard cutout of a dog is not really a dog. This thing in front of me is a dog. The cutout of the cat is not a cat. This thing in front of me is a cat. And notice that here you start relying, right, on a kind of an understanding rather than just a sensation. The whole process of going from the bottom, the shadows, to the second level, the cutout objects, to the third level, the actual physical objects, that ascension, that going up, is a kind of enlightenment, is a kind of getting more light and more light and more light. In better words that we can understand, that's understanding. That's not knowledge. You're starting to form a kind of understanding. You still don't know what a dog is, right? Even though you saw the actual animal in front of you now. First you saw the shadow, then you saw the cardboard cutout, and now you see the actual dog in front of you. You still really don't know what a dog is. Even if I asked you, what is a dog? And you point out to the dog in front of you and you say, that's a dog. You have only pointed out what a dog is. You haven't really defined it yet. So here, when you're dealing with the objects themselves, right, you're not forming any kind of knowledge yet. You're starting to form what Plato refers to as understanding, okay? But you exit the realm of relying on objects. First is the hearsay, second, and shadows, second, the cutout objects, replicas of the objects, right? But right now, when you're outside of the cave and you have the light in front of you and you are shocked, right? What you see in front of you, you make sense of. And that making sense of it is what you would call knowledge. So you're starting to form a kind of understanding, okay? And you're really excited. You want to go back to the cave. You want to tell people the world you're living is all an illusion. There are things outside that you can see. And so you go down and you want to tell them that, and they start launching rocks at you. They want to kill you. They don't want to hear what you want to say. You're challenging our customs and norms and habits and beliefs and way of life as a whole. Who are you, little kid, right? To rock the boat and to challenge everything we believe in. And so you're almost like a prophet who's running for his life. And because you're not a prophet and because you don't feel that you owe them so much, you say, the hell with it, I'm leaving. And you go out of the cave. You're tired of telling people about the truth that you now understand. They don't understand it. They see things in front of them, and they look so real to them that there's no reason to believe you. Okay? But now you know what a dog is, or you think you know what a dog is, what a cat is, and you start thinking some more. And you ask yourself, hold on a second. The shadow that I saw when I was at the very bottom level, right, at the first level, at the very, very bottom, the shadow was just a copy of a cardboard cutout. And the only reason why I saw the shadow is because of the fire that was in front of it, the light. But when I got up to the third level, I realized that the cutout cardboard shape of a dog, a cat, a car, a tree, that was never really the dog, the cat, and the tree. That was a copy of the real dog and cat and tree that I see outside. Maybe these objects, the dog, the cat, and the tree, are what's real, and they explain to me what the world really is. Okay? And then he takes it one further stage. Okay? We, as human beings, see the world in a certain way. You look at a car outside of you, and you see a white car. The dog or the cat, they see colors differently. They don't see what you see. To give you a better example, when you and I look at a flower, we see a red color. We see generally one red color. When the bee looks at the flower, she will see, it will see, he will see, whatever you want. The bee will see at least 70 shades of red. Okay? And you're like, no way, that's not true. It is true. There are 70 shades of red that appear to you as red. We as a species, the humans, can distinguish shades of green more than any other color. More than red, more than yellow, more than brown. Why? Because for thousands of years, our life was in the jungle, in the greens. It depended on being able to tell the difference between shades of green so that we can spot animals we're hunting and so that we can plan out our hiding as well, camouflage, right? So in short, the world only appears to us in a certain way. It appears to the cat and the bird in a different way. It appears to the bat in a different way. Can you guys still hear me? It says my internet is unstable for a second. Can you still hear me? Somebody text me.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
We can hear.
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay. Now, we also know something called E equals mc squared. Okay. I don't know much of science, but I know that E equals mc squared is a formula that refers, right, to the interchangeability of objects between mass, physical objects, and energy. We are told by science that the object that you see in front of you is not really a solid physical object. In fact, if you really think about it, the car in front of you, or the chair in front of you, or the laptop in front of you is made up of molecules. And molecules are made up of atoms. And the atom, each atom, if you take it in isolation, it has a nucleus, and around it, there's a big space. There's an electron ring. There's another big space, and a larger electron ring, and a bigger space, and a larger electron ring. And so that atom itself is about 90% empty space. It bonds with another atom, and so on, and they form molecules. That molecule is 90% empty space. That molecule joins up with millions, if not billions, of other, mostly empty space. So if you really look at the car in front of you, which is made up of billions and billions of molecules, these molecules are for the most part invisible. They have empty space, but they oscillate, they move at a very rapid speed to the point that you don't notice that they're moving back and forth, and it appears like a solid to you. So in reality, the world that you look at is not a solid world. It's a world that's constantly, it's energy. Energy so rapid, so fast, that it goes back from energy to physical object, from energy to physical object, from energy to physical object, back and forth, and then it appears solid to you. If you grab, when I was a kid, we'd grab a rope, and at the end of the rope, we tie something like a charcoal or something that we end up burning, and we start looping it and looping it and looping it really, really fast until you see one solid ring of light. You don't see a lit piece moving in a circle. You see one solid lit circle. That's a visual illusion. Okay. So in short, the world is not really what it is. It appears to us in a certain way. And then we understand that what we see in its physical form, but it's not truly the actual thing. And so here Plato takes it further, right? Takes it one step further, and he says that person who's in front of the light now sees the world around them in a very unique way. He says, if the shadows was a copy of the cardboard, and the cardboard is a copy of the dog I see in front of me, well, what is this dog that I see in front of me? Maybe this dog and the other dog and the other different looking dog and yet another different looking dog, all of these different kinds of dogs are copies of some other dog up there where the sun is. And he calls this the forms. And for Plato, the forms are not physical things, and they don't exist in your brain or exist in heaven. They somehow, somewhere up there, giving the form of dogness to the dog and catness to the cat and treeness to the tree. It's very hard to understand this concept for me. But he realizes, or rather understands, that just like the shadow is a copy of the cardboard and the cardboard is a copy of the real dog, maybe the real dog that I see right now is not real, but rather it is a copy of some further real dog with the essence of dog qualities. Okay. And here he thinks that you form a kind of an understanding about how the world works. And that's where knowledge comes in. Knowledge doesn't come from touching or seeing the object, but rather understanding the sensations that the object creates. And so for him, the knowledge that you get from the shadows, or the knowledge that you get from the objects, or the knowledge that you get from touching the physical objects in the world outside of the cave, these things are temporary. These things are changing. These things are not fixed. And so they do not amount to any kind of knowledge. And for you, knowledge comes from understanding, not from seeing things and sensing things. Okay, so this is pretty much what is called the theory of the forms. It's short, okay, and you can read the article if you didn't read it at least. And the theory of the forms, right, holds that there is an unchanging realm of perfect forms or ideas beyond our, right, tactile world, in a sense, right? Anything that we can touch and observe here. And so Plato also considers that this allegory means for philosophers what it means for philosophers in society. If you understand the forms, does that mean you have to tell everybody else what you found? In a sense, yes, you feel a desire to share it with people. Okay, you feel an obligation. This is what I like most about the story, is that when you go out and you discover the truth, the first thing you want to do is to go back down and share it with people. That explains to me the moral requirement that we have upon us to share knowledge with others, right? I don't like my job much in reality. It's, especially when Students are not engaged, they're not interested. I call myself a used shoe salesman. A used shoe salesman. Nobody wants to buy used shoes. But the kind of interest I get from students in what I do in general is kind of discouraging. And I don't like my job also in a sense because it doesn't really pay me well. You might think, no, this guy lives a very luxurious life. On the contrary, right? I'm the only person working in my family. My wife doesn't work. And if you live in a single income home, life is tough. Life is really tough. And so the money I make from my job is not really worthwhile. Maybe the hours are worthwhile, okay? The time I spend in the classroom, 15 hours a week, plus whatever preparation and grading, I rarely do a total of, let's say, 44 hours a week. So it's great in that way. But what I really like about my job, and that's just truth. When I was hired, my chair asked me, why do you like teaching? Why do you like teaching? And I said to her something. I said, when you're trying to explain something to someone and they don't get it? She said, yes. I said, and then you try again and they still don't get it? She said, yes. I said, and then you try in a different way and suddenly you see their face changing and they tell you, aha, I got it, I understand it. And she says, yes. I said, that's my drug. That is like a drug to me. That gives me a euphoria, right? So sharing what I know, whatever it is, I could be on a soccer field playing and somebody comes and says, can you teach me that trick? Suddenly I feel alive, right? If I cook something and somebody tells me, can you give me that recipe? Suddenly I feel really excited and I want to share the recipe. So there is something valuable about teaching, which is sharing something that you feel almost obliged to share, that you feel great when you share. It's not like food that you have just for yourself and when you share it, it becomes less. No, with knowledge, when you share it, it becomes more for you and for people around you. So the story that Plato is giving us is a story of a social story, right? About the importance of knowledge, true knowledge, of course, and how you have an obligation to share it with others. But aside from that, it's the idea of enlightenment, that knowledge is a kind of enlightenment. You're going up that ladder in stages, and each stage requires unpacking a kind of a layer. It's almost like an onion. You take one layer, then you get another layer, and finally you get to the core. So Plato is interesting in that he's telling us this like social story, but he's also telling us that knowledge is not just about sensations. Sensations give you that, sensations, nothing else. You see some object and it creates in you a sensation of, okay, this is beautiful, or this is ugly, or this is warm, or this is cold. But it is understanding the sensations, right? It is understanding the sensation that gives you that form of knowledge, that extra form of knowledge that you want or that you seek. Okay? So this state of affairs for Plato, society is a political arrangement where people have power, where people have some wealth, and we put value on these things. But he wants to show us that the most valuable thing really is the value of wisdom, understanding things. And what's also valuable is this moral obligation, almost like a kind of a fairness. You just discovered something, it's only fair if you share it with others. Okay? So this story proposes that instead that we should build a society where those who have like direct experience of the light should guide others that don't. That we shouldn't have society guide us through customs and habits and norms that we've learned over just 1,000 years. You need concrete, genuine knowledge, right, to share with others. So he does not divide knowledge and how I know things from politics and from society. They're all intertwined. To know something is essentially social. Okay? Knowledge, when you know something, you use words that you learned in society to make sense of it. Right? If you see a new object for the first time and you have no words for what it is, you don't know what it is. You cannot say what it is. The only time that you can really refer to something you know, it has a social context. It has a political context. So norms and customs and habits, social arrangements, financial arrangements, hierarchies, they're obstacles to knowledge. Knowledge requires a kind of a wisdom, understanding, and, right, fairness, a kind of a desire to share it with others. Okay? But essentially, it is something that you arrive at not through your senses. So I like Plato because he kind of sends you the message that the truth is not just simply something that you see. If you can't see it, it doesn't mean it's not there. Okay? I'm going to jump into David Hume now on how we know things, but I'll tell you another short story about my interaction with my kid. I tried to send this message across to my kid from a very young age. Okay, being a philosopher, I had him study Phil 185 when he was about, I think, 10 or 12 years old, by the way. So I had him read some of the stuff and ask him about it. But from a very young age, I told my kid that just because you don't see something, it doesn't mean it's not real. And I told him, for example, God. We don't see God. So now you notice my indoctrination, of course. I'm trying to teach my kid about God. And I want my kid to know that God is, and, you know, maybe that's from my beliefs and my sense of comfort, right? But so I'm telling my kid, and my kid says to me, well, how does God know everything? Right? And I said, well, can you imagine you have a computer and another computer and another computer, like many, many computers? He says, yes. I said, when you type something on a computer and you search, do you know how quickly it comes to you? He says, yes. I said, well, imagine thousands of computers connected to cameras, right? Everywhere. And they process the information very fast. Today, we call that AI. We don't call it God, but we call it AI, right? Which is really bizarre. Type anything into Google and you get the answer in an instant. Even ask about an address, right? Just type and you get the picture of the address from the top and, you know, the car parked in front of it and so on. But anyways, so I tried to tell him knowing things in that way, it's not really such an obstacle. So you don't just limit to your knowledge to the things that you see. He said, okay, Dad, that's great. And one day he's in grade 7 or 8 or something. He's in middle school before he goes to high school. And he comes home and he says, Dad, there's a ghost in my school. I said, no, no, there's no ghost in your school. He says, Dad, there's a ghost in my school. I know there's a ghost in my school. I said, how do you know there's a ghost in your school? And he said, I hear these noises. Right? I thought, okay, my son is sick. So I hear noises. So, so I said, well, did you see it? And he says, no. I said, then it's not real. It's just you're imagining it. He says, but didn't you tell me just because I can't see it, it doesn't mean it's not real? And I was like, oops, I gotta be careful what I teach my kid, right? But so, you know, just because we get the story from Plato, it doesn't mean that we have to agree with it. That's all I'm trying to say. There's not a monopoly on truth here. I don't claim to be a scientist now that knows about things, but I like the idea that our senses are limited, right? Our senses are limited. And that takes us to the second reading that we have in today's reading. It's a bit shorter than the first one. And the second reading is called Hume's Empiricism. Okay, I'm just going to open it up right now to kind of share it with you. And Hume is a very profound thinker. Before I talk about his idea, since we have time, I'm going to tell you a very interesting story about David Hume. Okay, David Hume, as a philosopher, a famous philosopher. During his time, his books were used in universities and colleges. His ideas became foundational for the field called psychology. So he's the first, in the modern sense, 1700s, to talk in a psychological way, which laid the grounds for Sigmund Freud to talk about psychology and so on. At age 18, he might have been your age or slightly younger than some of you, maybe slightly older, I don't know. At age 18, he decided to write a book. And he went ahead and wrote the book. 2 years later, when he was 20 or 21, he finished the book, about 450 pages. And he gave the book the title, A Treatise Concerning Human Understanding. A treatise means complete and finished work. There's nothing to add to it. See how pompous he is, how full of himself? He's only 19, and he thinks now he can write something about how humans form knowledge and understanding in a way that cannot be topped. In fact, he challenges the reader to add something to that. Okay? The book does not sell. It sells only 2 copies. The one he bought and the one his mother bought. Okay? Just kidding. But the book doesn't sell very well. It's a kind of a failure. Unlike most of us, he doesn't give up. He tells himself, man, people are dumb. Let me dumb this down a little bit. Let me rewrite the book in an easier to understand version. So he rewrites it in 200 pages instead of the 450 pages. He abridges it, makes it shorter, easier to understand. And he's humbled now. Instead of calling it a treatise, he calls it an inquiry into human understanding. A more humble kind of a title. And the book starts selling like hotcakes. It becomes really popular, and Hume becomes a famous philosopher. Okay? Despite of how famous he is and the book is being used, he could never get a job at a university while he's alive. He could never teach in a university. Anybody can guess why?
Because of his book, what he wrote in that?
Because of what he wrote in the
No.
book. And one of the things that he wrote on the book is that if you cannot see it, you cannot know it. If you cannot hear it, you cannot know it. If you want to know that something is real, there you go. This is real. The phone is real. The pen is real. The paper is real. God, where is it? Not real. Angel, where is it? Not real. Miracle, where is it? Not real. So Hume is the exact opposite of Plato, where Plato talks to us about forms, things that don't exist in the physical world, right? Things that transmit existence to physical objects, things that give essence to physical objects. You could think of it almost like a god, right? Plato actually believed in God. He called God the unmoved mover, right? He gave an argument. He said, what causes A? B. What causes B? C. What causes C? D, and so on. He says, if everything that exists must have a cause, then nothing would exist, right? What caused A? B. What caused B? C. What caused C? D. And this will go on and on and on for everything. What caused me? God. Well, what caused God? God's God. What caused God's God? God's God, God, and so on. He says there has to be something that exists by itself, something that creates itself and then creates everything else. So he uses logic to come up with the understanding or the idea that there must be a God, and he calls the God an unmoved mover or an uncaused cause. Okay, so Plato really believed in the, if you want to call it, the supernatural, all right, or he did not limit our knowledge to physical things. Hume, on the other hand, did quite the opposite. He said, our limit of knowledge as human beings is our sensations, right? So some people misunderstand him, I think, and he says, if you don't see it, it doesn't exist. I don't think he means that. If you don't see it, you cannot know that it exists. Can you see God? No, you can't. Then you cannot form the statement, I know that God exists, until you somehow develop some sort of a mechanism that will discover God, or your brain physical structure changes so that you can see God. But our knowledge of things is limited to our sensations. Okay? And he has a very simple argument for that. He uses a simple logic to come up with things of that sort. Okay? A little bit hard to read, a different kind of reading. And he says, everybody here will readily allow that there's a considerable difference between the perceptions of, sorry, just a second, the perceptions of the mind when a man feels pain or excessive heat, or the pleasure from moderate warmth, and when he afterwards recalls in his memory this sensation or anticipates it in the imagination. So, what Hume is saying is that when we experience things in our life, right, when we experience things, we have a kind of a sensation. You bite into pineapple for the first time, and you form a sensation of the taste of pineapple. You touch fire for the first time, and your finger burns, and you form a sensation of that fire burning. You see the sunset the first time, and you form a sensation of the sunset. Because later, you remember in your mind that feeling of the pinching or the fire burning or the sound or the taste of the pineapple. And he says, surely, the memory of the pineapple is not as intense as biting into that pineapple. Okay? So Hume thinks that we as a species have sensory faculties, taste, hearing, sight, touch, and so on. And these faculties give us immediate sensations, which he calls them impressions. He calls these sensations impressions. So an impression for Hume, he starts inventing concepts now, right? He's coming up with his own concepts. But he says an impression is a first-hand experience. An impression is a sensation of something. It is immediate, it is intense, and it is clear. So when you taste a pineapple for the first time, right, you get the sense of that flavor immediately. And it is very intense. You cannot even remove, once you bite into that, that's it. The sensation is there. It's like eating a hot pepper and it causes your tongue to burn. That sensation is not going away. You can't walk away from it. So sensations are intense, they're immediate, and they are clear. But he says your mind forms memories of these sensations. So you remember the taste of a pineapple, or you remember the taste of that hot pepper. That memory of the pineapple or the hot pepper that you ate is not as intense as actually eating the pineapple, right? So when you close your eyes and you remember that hot pepper that you ate yesterday, you get a sensation. You almost sometimes might feel it. You're like, oh my God, yeah, I feel it in my mouth almost. Because your brain can remember the feeling that you had. And remembering that feeling, right, especially when it comes to scents, the sense of smell, it brings back that idea back to your mind. And so you remember it. But it's not as intense as actually biting through by that pineapple or pepper. It's not as clear right, of a sensation as biting through that pepper. And moreover, you can walk away from it, right? If you remember the taste of a bad thing, you're like, oh my, or you remember the bad smell, for example. You can shut off your mind and walk away from it. He says that thing, the memory of a sensation, I will call it an idea. So our knowledge is based on impressions and ideas. Impressions are first-hand experiences of a color, of a taste, of a sound, or whatever. And ideas are a memory created in the mind of a first-hand impression, like the taste, sound, and so on. So here he gives us a kind of a mechanism for knowing. Here are the mechanics of knowing for us as a species. He says we have all sorts of sensations: touch, sight, smell, sound, taste. And these senses are like a sponge that drink up the world around us. They are the source or causes of our experiences, right? And imagine you're born blind, you can never see the color red. So you can never have an impression of the color red. And so you can never ever have an idea of the color red. There was a kid, it's a very rare case. It happens every like 100 million cases or something. But there was a kid in the West Bank, Palestine, that could not taste hot peppers. Okay, so that kid will never know really the burning sensation from eating a hot pepper. And he liked the taste so much that all he wanted to eat was hot peppers. It's true. And his parents would give him kilos upon kilos of hot peppers, right? And they were worried that he's going to get sick. But there is something in his taste buds that does not taste the hot peppers. So you tell him, this is hot, this is spicy, and he will tell you, I don't understand what you mean. This is sweet, just like the banana and the ice cream. Okay? So our senses limit to us, or they're like a caliber on what we can form as knowledge. Okay? This is where Hume is. So Hume thinks we have sensations. These sensations, we call them impressions. Okay? And these impressions that we experience, they're forceful, they're clear, and they are intense. And they create in our mind a memory of it. That memory I will call an idea. And that idea is not as clear, not as forceful, or not as intense. He says, here, therefore, we may divide all perceptions of the mind, experiences that we have, into two classes or categories or species, which are distinguished by their different degrees of force and clarity. Vivacity is clarity. The less forcible and lively are commonly denominated or termed ideas. The other species, they need a name because it does not exist in our language. So I am going to call it an impression. Okay, so for Hume, all knowledge comes from impressions and ideas. Okay. And he says nothing in the first view, when you look at people in general, nothing may seem more unbounded than the thought of man. That, okay, we have a brain, we have a mind, and also that mind goes through sensations we call impressions, but it also goes through things we call ideas. This mind is unlimited, unbounded, okay? Which he says the mind not only escapes all human power and authority, but is not even restrained within the limits of nature and reality. Okay, so it says our mind has an unlimited capacity, and this capacity has no boundaries. It's not even bounded by reason or reality anymore. To form monsters, right, and join incongruous shapes and appearances costs the imagination no more trouble than to conceive of the most natural and familiar objects. Can you think right now, can you imagine a human being with 200 wings? Can any of you imagine that? Most of us can, right? I can imagine a human being. Can you imagine a human being that teleports from place to place? Can you imagine a human being that teleports from place to place? And it can, the human being, with a single look at an object, it would make it melt. So I can teleport from here to Paris, look at the Eiffel Tower, and make it melt with just my eyes looking at it. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine an ant larger than the house that you live in? You can imagine that, right? Can you imagine a gramango? Anybody knows what's a gramango?
No.
I just invented that. That's an orange and a mango in one. A gramango is an orangey mango or a mangoey orange. It looks almost like the shape of a watermelon. It has the thick skin of an orange, but when you open it, you get the texture of a mango. It has no pulp inside whatsoever. You can eat the whole thing. And it tastes like a combination of mango, orange, and pineapple. Can you guys imagine that with me?
Seems great. We can
Yeah.
imagine.
Most
Just
of you, yes, most of you can. And in fact, you're like, holy smokes, that sounds like a great fruit. A mango, an orange, and a pineapple in one. Wow, I would like to taste that. The reason why you say this is because your brain experienced the flavor of a mango, experienced the flavor of an orange, and experienced the flavor of a pineapple. And then you've seen them and you've touched them. And when you combine these images together, you can make sense of that thing called a gramango, even though it's not real, right? For Hume, this is all it takes to invent something not real. The brain can manipulate information in such a way, right, to make unfamiliar objects seem natural. And he says, but though our thought seems to possess this unbounded liberty, even though the mind has an unlimited kind of freedom, we shall find upon nearer examination that it is really confined within very narrow limits, and that the creative power of the mind amounts to no more than, this is a very important point, guys, that I'm choosing to highlight for you here. Questions on this kind of, I told you at the beginning, last class, that I will be giving you lots of questions, right? I will ask you what is Russell's main point in his argument, the value of philosophy. Why does Russell think philosophy has value? Why does Russell think philosophy is a foundation of the sciences? Why does Russell think that uncertainty of philosophy is actually a plus, not a negative, right? Things of that sort. So far today, I might ask you, what's the difference between impressions and ideas? Okay, impressions come first. They are forceful, they're clear, right? We cannot avoid them. They're sensations. They're more vivid, more lively. Ideas are copies of these sensations. They're memories we form of these sensations. They're less forceful, less clear, and we can walk away from them, and so on. So I can ask you, what is the difference between impressions and ideas? What is an impression and what is an idea? Okay. Also, now is a topic for another question I can ask you. What are the 4 operations of the mind that Hume is talking about? Now here, Hume is talking about 4 operations that the mind does to create ideas. So he says, even though the mind seems to possess liberty and freedom, this liberty is really nothing more than the faculty of 1, compounding, 2, transposing, 3, augmenting, and 4, diminishing. So the 4 operations of the mind, according to Hume, are 1, compounding, 2, transposing, 3, augmenting, and 4, diminishing. What does it mean without the fancy language? To compound, right? To compound is to add things together. To transpose, right, is to take something from an idea away rather than add something to an idea. To augment is to make something bigger. To diminish is to make something smaller. So think of it, let's explain compounding. You think of a unicorn, okay? Anybody has ever seen a unicorn? Does anyone here believe that unicorns are real? Let me see the chat. Oh, thank God, no one believes unicorns are real. Okay, thank God. I mean, if you're embarrassed, it's okay, but if you think unicorns are real, tell us. We want to make fun of you. Somebody said maybe. Okay. Hume will tell you, where did you see a unicorn? Can you show me one unicorn, please? I'd like to see one. Right? Almost like the concept of a dragon. But to make up a unicorn is very easy. You think of a horse, you think of a rhinoceros with a horn, and then you think of an eagle with wings, and all you have to do is to compound these ideas together. The wings of a horse, the horn of a rhino, you put these two things, the wings of an eagle and the horn of a rhino, you compound them with the body of a horse, and suddenly you have a rhino. So compounding is to take things from ideas and attach them to another idea. Transposing is to take something away from an idea. Can you think of a wingless eagle? Oh yeah, I can. I can imagine a wing without eagle, I can imagine an eagle without wings, and it's just hopping around looking for food, but it doesn't fly because it doesn't have wings. I can imagine that. That's transposing. Giants. Has anybody ever seen a 16-foot human being? I don't think so. Did science ever discover the skeleton of a 16-foot human being called a giant? I don't think so. Where does the idea come from? Augmenting. You just think of something and you think of it larger and larger and larger and larger, and before you know it, you have just thought of a giant. Okay? I'll make fun of myself as well. When I was a kid, okay, and you know, I shouldn't share these things with you. Last week I shared the water tap and rain with you, but just to realize how stupid I was when I was a kid, I read Gulliver's Travel. And Gulliver's Travels, they have it as a movie now, was a story about tiny human beings, little tiny human beings that live on some island, and Gulliver, some traveler that gets trapped on the island, and he gets stuck in their fights and whatever, and they tie him to the ground. And I'm reading this book, and it's got all these drawings of this human being tied with the tiny, tiny little creatures. And I kid you not, for the next 3 years, I spent my life looking for tiny little creatures. I would look for them everywhere. I wanted to find these tiny creatures so bad, right? Indigenous culture today, they talk about tiny people. Indigenous people in Canada believe in tiny people. And if you don't know, in the indigenous culture, they believe that you should put coins around the house. Put coins around the house because the little people, they come and steal things that belong to you, like your keys, your phone, your pen. So around the house, when you can't find your things, It's the little people that took them. And if you want the little people not to take them, leave them coins around the house, money. They will take the coins and they would not leave your things. So the myth is leave coins around the house and you won't lose things. You might think this is a bit bizarre, but if you're a Catholic, I don't know if there are Catholics in the room, when you lose something, you pray to Saint Anthony. Saint Anthony is some dude that we give him, or the Catholics give him, divine qualities. And when you lose an object, you pray to Saint Anthony, and Saint Anthony will help you find it, right? So it's not really far-fetched. But Hume is trying to tell us that the human mind works like that. We think of ideas, right? We see we have sensations or impressions, then we think up ideas based on them, and these ideas are unlimited. We can imagine them bigger, smaller, we can transpose them, add them to other ideas, transpose them, take ideas from them, or compound them, add ideas from them. So you could think of a golden mountain. Very simple. You think of the color gold, and you think of a mountain, and suddenly you created in your mind a golden mountain. Does that mean that the mountain is real? Well, go out and look. If you find the golden mountain, then the idea is real. If you don't find the golden mountain, then the idea is not real. Think of a God. Where did this concept of God come from, according to Hume? It must be something that we created, because when I go look around the world, I don't see a God, I don't hear a God, I don't know of anyone that saw a God, I don't know of anyone that heard a God, and so that concept is created by our mind through the process of compounding, augmenting, transposing, and diminishing. And he gives us an argument to prove this, right? He says, well, let me look at two simple concepts, okay? One very simple and small, and the other very complicated and big. So he thinks the smallest concept you could think of a red dot or a blue dot, just a dot, one color red. That's a very simple concept. Very small. It doesn't have parts. It doesn't have components. He's wrong, of course. A color is made up of many components. But think of the color red. That's the simplest kind of sensation you can have, right? We're not talking about a mango you're tasting. You have to cut the skin, and then you have to smell it, and then you have to taste it. No, just the color red, a simplest, smallest concept. And what is the biggest, most complicated concept you could think of? Anyone? What's the most complicated concept that you could think of? Well, to him is God. God is a very simple, very complicated kind of concept. It's bigger than existence even, because God is what gives existence to everything else, right? Or so comes the assumption or idea. So he says, okay, let's look at these concepts and see where they come from. Okay, let's go with the simple one first. He says the color red. Imagine a person blind from birth. Imagine you have a brother or sister born blind, and every day for the last 18 years, at sunset, you hold their hands, you go for a walk, you sit on the ledge, and you look at the sunset with your brother. And your brother tells you, what are you looking at? And you say, sunset, every day. He says, describe the sunset for me. He says, the sun that looks like a ring, it starts to go down, and the sky is changing in color. I see orange, I see yellow, I see red. They are beautiful colors. Do you think your brother will know what the color red is? He might describe a sunset to someone. He might touch something that's spherical and understand that the sun, which is in a distance, is spherical. Okay? But there is no way, shape, or form that your brother will understand what the concept color means, let alone understand what red is, nor can he identify it, find it, imagine it, or imagine anything concerning the color red. he would not even know what color means. Similarly, imagine someone born without a sense of smell. Nothing. No smell whatsoever. Obviously, there's no taste, right? They cannot tell the difference between sour and sweet. No matter what you tell them, they will never be able to tell the difference between sour and sweet or stinky and nice smell. That's it. There's nothing that can create that idea in them. So when it comes to simple sensations, it's impossible to form them if you don't have the sensory faculty. Okay? So for humans, if they talk about things that no one ever saw or heard or smelled or touched or sensed in any way, then they most probably created it in their mind. Think of the concept God. Can you give me the impression of God? He says, no, you can't. And you surely don't need to see God to understand the concept. There's a person who thought after they saw strength, a strong and a weak person, after they saw a smart and a dumb person, after they saw a big and a small person, they started imagining in their mind a creature that is good, strong, and wise. And then they started imagining that creature, you can add to it a bit more wisdom, a bit more knowledge, a bit more strength, and a bit more life. And then you add, and then you add, and then you add in an unlimited way. And now you can expect that there's a creature that has unlimited knowledge, unlimited wisdom, unlimited strength, unlimited goodness. Hey, I'm going to call it God. And so this was the main reason why Hume couldn't find really a job anywhere, because he was an atheist. Okay? They were living in a cancel culture too. We're not the only ones that are living in a cancel culture. So Hume was canceled, even though he was a wise philosopher, wrote a book, was a famous book, was used in universities, right? His views on God, not on politics, right, made sure that he would not ever get a job, right? And so here in the remainder of, right, the paper, he wants to prove to us that the concept God, that we mean an infinitely intelligent, wise, good being, arises from reflecting on the operation of our own mind. We augment without limit these qualities of goodness and wisdom. That's it, right? And that's how we create the concept of God. Then he goes on to talk about the blind man from birth, right? We're not reading Descartes' rationalism. My apology about this edition. I thought I removed it. Okay, so Descartes' rationalism is not part of the reading. I will go back and delete it. I did not notice it. I thought it was gone. Okay, so for those of you who are with me and those of you who are, listening for the recording, Descartes is also a rationalist, which I will not cover. That's why I brought Plato. I wanted to talk about Plato as a rationalist and compare him with Hume. Usually we compare Descartes with Hume, but Descartes is a bit complicated, and I didn't want to start a new kind of, more difficult idea for you guys yet. In the second part here and the last part, here's where he's talking about the colors to a blind man or the sounds to a deaf man, right? Where he says you cannot form that kind of idea. Okay? And so imagine, if you'd like, imagine a person born, right? As they're born, they cannot see, and they cannot hear, and they cannot smell, and they cannot taste, and they don't feel touch when you touch them. What can you teach this person? That's a question to you guys. First one to answer it. We're almost done with the class.
It's very difficult to. Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, sir, I can.
Okay, I said that it's very difficult to teach such kind of person who doesn't have any like senses to feel or and any kind of senses in them, right?
Yeah, your word is a little bit misleading. When you say it's very difficult, it means you can teach him something, but it's very difficult.
Okay, it's impossible then.
Thank you.
Impossible.
That's yeah, right. Difficult means there's a possibility. Impossible means there is no possibility.
Impossible. Never,
And
no possibility at all.
absolutely. And this is why I think people misunderstood Hume. I don't think Hume wants to say there is no God, but Hume wants to say you can never know whether there is a God or not because your knowledge is limited to your sensations. Think of it in this way: aliens, forget about God, UFOs and aliens, right? By the way, in the when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, even in the early 90s, a lot of people were talking about UFOs and how the UFOs kidnapped them and how they saw UFOs and how the UFO came above them, then the light just touched them, and then they found themselves in a spaceship and they performed experiments on them. That was a common thing, really common. As soon as we got smartphones, phones that can record and instantly record things, nobody's talking about UFOs anymore. Nobody sees them, nobody encounters them. It's really bizarre while that happens, okay? But in short, because we have no way of seeing the UFOs, documenting it, taking pictures of it, then we cannot talk about them as if they're real. There might be aliens that exist in the universe, but you and I cannot talk about them as if they're real because we have not encountered them, seen them, heard them, communicated with them, and so on. So I think for Hume, his skepticism, he's a skeptic. It means he denies our ability to know things. He doesn't say necessarily that God does not exist, but for us, as a knowing species that relies on its sensations, we cannot know whether God is real or not. Miracles that took place in the past, or miracles that possibly might take place now, we are not able to know it because we have no way of verifying it. Okay, so this is it. In a nutshell, know the difference between impressions and ideas for Hume. Impressions always come first, and ideas are copies of impressions. Ideas are memories of the impressions, which are sensations. The memories of these sensations are not as intense, not as forceful, like you can step out of it, and not as clear. So the taste of a pineapple is intense. You feel it right there, right? You cannot walk away from it once it's in your mouth, right? It's clear, it's vivid, it's immediate, right? But when you remember the taste of a pineapple, it's not as forceful. You can walk away from it. It's not as clear. It's not even as satisfying, right? You might still say, oh, I still want a pineapple, right? That's not enough to imagine that I ate a pineapple. So know the difference between impressions and ideas. Know the four operations of the mind: augmenting, transposing, diminishing, right? And know them all, be able to explain the difference between them. And Hume's last experiment, that Hume performed an experiment on the concept God, complex, and on the concept color, simple, to show that a complex ideas can be created by the mind, but a simple idea can only be achieved through experience. You will never know the taste of a pineapple till you taste it. You will never know the sound of a piano until you hear it. You will never know the smell of honey until you smell it, and things of that sort. But more complex ideas we can create in our mind. Okay, that's it for today. Thank you for joining me. Alessandra, Amr, Mahbube, Matthew, Samiha, and our Zoom guest. I appreciate you coming today. Any questions before I call it the day?
Thank you. That was great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. See you next week. I got your email, by the way. I will reply it. Thanks for replying in that one.
Okay, yeah. The timing depends on how I set it
Yeah,
initially
I
for
got.
the rest of the students. Okay.
And
Uh,
also one thing, just sorry to interrupt. Please go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead. The timing depends on the initial time I give students. So if I give the class an
Okay.
assignment that takes 20 minutes, students who are
Then
accommodated will
whatever.
get 40 minutes, not the standard
Okay.
180 minutes. Okay. If you
Okay.
have any questions, any of you, feel free to email me anytime, whatever the question is, it doesn't matter. Okay.
Okay. Okay.
Enjoy the rest of the week, and I'll see you guys next Thursday.
Next Thursday. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.